And look, you will recall that last week Meghan Markle, who apparently wants to break from the royal family, but she still wants to be the Duchess of Sussex, she made some vacuous comments about racism. She made a video with her husband saying it was time people became uncomfortable in fighting racism. You think she meant comfortable? I think she got that all wrong. Well, enter the remarkable Indigenous Australian Jacinta Price. She stood for the Liberal Party at the last federal election for the Northern Territory seat of Lingiari, named after the prominent Aboriginal rights activist Vincent Lingiari. Jacinta Price is an outstanding Indigenous figure. She should be in the National Parliament. Her mother was a former Northern Territory government minister, Bess Price. Well, she criticised Meghan Markle as, quote, a woman of great privilege who's completely removed from reality and circumstances on the ground. She said, her lending her voice to the Black Lives Matter movement is silencing the voices of those people in the community who are vulnerable to black-on-black gang violence. Now, as you know, in New York, the police are being blamed for black deaths, even though in America 89.5% of all Afro-American homicides are caused by Afro-Americans. But the police budget in New York has been cut by $1 billion. Shootings have doubled. Most of the victims are black. Jacinta Price said it is ridiculous to think that you would defund the police when the most vulnerable members of society are the African-American people. Who's going to help them, if not the police? Jacinta Price is the Director of Indigenous Studies at the Centre for Independent Studies, and she said similar calls in Australia were, quote, destroying our relationship with authority. It's Aboriginal women and children who are suffering the most because of sexual abuse and family violence. She said, there's no interest in learning the truth. Aboriginal people are dying at a far greater rate at the hands of other Aboriginal people. She said that is something this movement is not interested in. Well, she's right. But as she said, when she brings these matters up, she's called a race traitor. Jacinta has said that, quote, some segments of the Aboriginal community spend too much energy on being perpetually aggrieved and not enough on attending to the real issues that the community faces. She has submitted to the federal government demoralising statistics about the communities of Kununurra, Wyndham and Ceduna in WA. She went to Canberra with a video revealing the appalling violence in Indigenous communities. No one much bothered. She highlighted that in one of the communities, 187 children were victims of sexual abuse. 36 men faced 300 charges and a further 124 were suspects. We're constantly told to listen to Aboriginal people on the ground. No one seems to listen to Jacinta Price. She's copped obscene abuse. One Indigenous Australian from the Compensation Cultural Heritage Council told her publicly, quote, how about you effing die a painful death, you sell-out coconut? You need to be eradicated like the disease you are. No censure for making those comments. Others have told her to F off and die. And others said she needed a spearing and a shooting. She was elected in 2015 to the Alice Springs Town Council, but she was told, quote, if I see you anywhere around Alice Springs, I'm going to punch the F out of you, you see. How many Aboriginal people and other Australians are silenced because of the fear of this kind of treatment? We used to have a racial discrimination commissioner, Tim Soutphommasane, who'd find offence even when none existed. He had nothing to say about the ugly racial abuse from the left directed towards Jacinta Price. No wonder she's indignant about the vacuous offerings of Meghan Markle. Jacinta Price clearly understands the benefits that were brought to us as a result of a distinguished British explorer and navigator, Captain Cook, claiming the great southern land for Great Britain on the 22nd of August 1770. She knows the way forward for disadvantaged Indigenous Australians. It doesn't involve moaning about the past, but rather being led by people like Jacinta Price into what could be, for all Aboriginal Australians, a rewarding future. While Meghan Markle was speaking from her $11 million Californian mansion, Jacinta Price was consoling an Indigenous relative who'd been bashed into a coma by her Indigenous partner. Jacinta Price was confronting reality. Meghan Markle, not surprisingly, mouthing rhetoric. Well, Mark Latham joins me on Mark Latham Day every Monday. Good to talk to you. Jacinta Price, no one's prepared to listen. They can say anything about her and no one cops a punishment of any kind.
Well, Alan, you know, she's one of the bravest people in the country and that bravery leads her to the truth. And that's all she speaks is the plain truth. But, you know, this stuff is everywhere. Over the weekend I read the New South Wales coroner's report, they have a domestic violence death review team. And it's overrepresented with Indigenous killing other Indigenous, time after time, 53 case studies. Then you get into the body of the report and they look at what causes this, and they don't look at alcohol or drug abuse or underclass or welfare dependency or poverty. They come down to racism, to say that the person who's killed another Indigenous is a victim of racism.
Right.
Now, you sort of look at this stuff with a sense of disbelief. It's completely surreal. But you get this in every government report, and all Jacinta Price is doing is standing up against this wall of nonsense with the truth. Yes. And everyone should be supporting her on that basis.
The Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody said, and I quote, Indigenous people are not more likely to die in custody than other Australians. Jacinta Price said, Aboriginal Australians are far more likely to die at the hands of other Aboriginal Australians than at the hands of white people who are in custody. But Mark, at the last election, she ran as the Liberal candidate in the city of Lingiari. There was a Greens candidate by the name of George Hanna. He got 8% of the vote. During the course of the campaign, he posted on Facebook a picture of Jacinta Price drinking from a coconut, fictitious picture, with a caption, "It's not every day you see a coconut drinking from a coconut." I remember
that, yeah, it was shameful, completely shameful.
Shameful. And she's got to cop this, and there's no redress.
Well, you know, she's just got to keep repeating the facts, and eventually the truth does out itself and has an impact. And the truth is, with regard to the Royal Commission, that when a police officer arrests an Indigenous in Australia, it's normally in the context of trying to protect another Indigenous from harm. That's the truth of it. The greatest harm to Indigenous in Australia is not from Captain Cook or Arthur Phillip, it's from other Indigenous. Right. That's what all the data shows.
Americans too.
But the left have put out under the banner of Black Lives Matter extremism that 437 Indigenous deaths in custody since the Royal Commission, they put out the slur against police and prison officers. Right. These are cases of murder. But you go through the coroner's report, and these coroners are getting softer by the day, but you go through those reports and the actual number is not 437, it's zero. It's zero number of murders by police and prison officers of Indigenous in custody.
She's made these points. Just let's go to this coronavirus thing. I mean, for goodness sake, there's one person in New South Wales in intensive care, two in hospital. Gladys Berejiklian says today we're on high alert. What on earth?
Tipping point. High alert was last week and now it's tipping point. There's a new hysterical piece of rhetoric every second day. Tipping point. Tipping towards what? We're certainly not going to be overrun in the hospital system. The hospital's never been so empty because the general public's scared to go there. They think the virus is there. And you've got two people in intensive care beds out of New South Wales' share of 7,000 in Australia. So what we do know are two things about this virus, Alan. One, the unemployment is going to be with us a hell of a lot longer than the virus.
Just on that unemployment and business, just have a look at these pictures. These were taken today at about 3:15 at the Opera House. There we are. This is a tragedy. Yep. This is one of the wonders of the world. The Opera House, look at it.
We lifted the lockout laws, but have a look at it.
Look at it.
It's still a desert.
Look at it.
And the centre of the city is hollowed out. There's a bit more activity on the urban fringe. But the second thing we know is that it's complete and utter hysteria about the impact of the virus. And this is a public exaggeration campaign, the like of which I've never seen. I mean, at least in the media, they should be reporting the facts about how many people are in hospital, how many in ICU, and also look at the data that 122 deaths in Australia, just 3 under the age of 60. So the virus has been in Australia for 6 months. So every second month, it kills one person under the age of 61. Compare that to other big fatality problems. In Australia already this year, we've had 1,200 male suicides. 1,200 male suicides. So 10% of that number is the total number of COVID-related deaths. A lot of those are people in their 80s and 90s, only 3 under the age of 60. So when you put it in proportion against things like the winter flu or male suicide, the hysteria and the repetition of this in the media is just so far out of proportion.
Frightening. I asked people at the weekend, do they remember swine flu? These were intelligent people, 2009. No. Now, there weren't 11,000 cases, as there are now with coronavirus after 6 months. There were 38,000. There weren't 112 people dead. There were 191 dead, and no one remembers it. There were no lectures, no lockdowns. We got on with our life.
Well, that's right. And you know, Alan, we're engaged in a very dangerous practice here ourselves. We're quoting data. We're quoting statistics, official reports, and you just don't get this in the mainstream media. And I get the feeling among the academics, because these academics flood all over the ABC, so-called health experts. wanting to close down the economy and destroy the economy. You get this in the mainstream media, you get this from some of the politicians. There's an element out there, I'm pretty convinced, there's an element out there who don't like capitalism, and they're saying to themselves, oh, we thought we could destroy capitalism with climate change policy. This virus is even better. This virus is even better. And that is an explanation of the hysteria. These people have got it way out of proportion.
11% of GDP has been spent on this.
Well, you know, that's the other thing that'll outlive the virus is the debt. Yeah. The unemployment and the debt are going to live a lot longer than this virus.
Well, I'll just leave you with one fact. You would remember this. When Kevin Rudd wanted to raise the debt ceiling when he was Prime Minister to $75 billion, that's the limit you could go to for government debt. And he wanted it, well, they went to town, the coalition went to town. The debt now is heading towards $1 trillion.
Yeah, in Rudd's day it was a national crisis.
Yeah.
It's 75 billion. Now it's 1,000 billion. And you'll probably need to double that by the time they stop the spending. So, you know, the easy way to not have to spend welfare, the easy way for businesses to trade is to keep the economy open. But you just feel this stampede pressure, the exaggeration, the hysteria, the panic porn, as the great Paul Murray has called it. You feel that pressure on the politicians and eventually the damn wall breaks. And, you know, look at one example there, what they did to the border towns, Albury, Wodonga, Echuca, Moama. They've now put them in a special zone. It's been torture for those communities. It all happened 2 weeks ago because of 3 infections in Albury and no cluster emerged. They're down to 0 infections now. So,
but we had infections at Casula in southwestern Sydney, and suddenly the rules that applied to them apply to Tamworth, Dubbo, Burke, everywhere else.
Every pub's a danger zone. So
good to talk to you. Keep at it.